when we talk about just energy and we look at Africa as the backdrop, the first question that hopefully my panelists would help us to answer would be about how just is just energy and the timelines for just energy. Does it work for Africa as a continent? So permit me to be very intentional with some statistics around Africa and energy consumption, and then you would also be the judge on the conversation we're about to have. So African contributes less than 4% of global greenhouse gas emissions, yet remains the most climate vulnerable region. 75% of Africans lack access to clean cooking, and about 600 million people still live without electricity. Now, African Development Bank estimates that Africa will require well over $200 billion for climate mitigation and adaptation, and yet Africa is only receiving about 10 to 12% of this. 3% of global energy investments flow into Africa, despite the fact that we have a big need. Natural gas accounts for 6% of Africa's total energy mix. So even if we used a third of our gas reserves, which will quadruple power generation, it would still not derail the global climate targets. So when we talk about just energy, we then wonder about the timelines, who's funding, how do we actually do just energy that makes sense for Africa, and who's benefiting from it. And I'm hopeful that these four incredible panelists would actually to help us to answer some of these questions. So
it's I don't know if you noticed that in our panelists we have three Alexes. So if you hear me, Alex O, Alex G, I call these energy rap this for the boys. All right, thank you very much. So my first question will start with Alex O. I know that is all the artists. Alex O, welcome, the chief officer of overseas. And the first question I'd like to ask is about the justness of just energy, right? So ESG frameworks, right, are designed parts of the market, this.
Yes, the continent influence upon the development access challenges.
How do you believe that history is to be refined and utilized to support Africa's just and this energy transition? So, is it big just energy? I think yes. How do you design for treatment? And it's the same question to every single person to start from to Dax.
Yes, thank you very much, Oche, and thank you very much for this opportunity to share insights this afternoon. When I think about that question, my mind just goes back to the stats you reeled out just before we started. I think it's almost evident from those stats that what we've described as just was never really just, quite frankly. And that's because of the disproportionate impact that we've had to deal with as Africa, vis-a-vis what our contribution has been to whatever the state of the climate is today. So if you look at it on a proportionate basis, you can say it's not just. But the question really is how do we then redefine what the transition should be for Africa? In my view, there's not a straight answer to that question. I think it's really designing something that is fit for purpose for Africa. And the question is, what's the state of energy access today? How energy rich or how energy poor is Africa? And it's clear that we're in a state of extreme energy poverty, given how much lack of access we have. The question then is designing ESG thresholds and standards and policies and frameworks that enables, first of all, energy access and also energy affordability, really. I think that's what it's about for Africa. So in designing those frameworks, unfortunately, as we've seen in the past several decades, we're not necessarily at the table when those discussions are had or have a say at the table. But to whatever extent we can, I think the question really is to say we're designing something that enables energy access and also energy affordability. So whatever is able to sort of lift as many people out of poverty as possible at an affordable cost, so to speak, such that we can use our resources to drive the growth that we require in Africa, while still overall maintaining that balance across the globe. And really, that's really where I think that the conversation needs to be had in terms of what works for Africa versus what works for the other regions of the world, without unduly penalizing Africa, really. So that's my take on that.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Namdi Okonkwo. I'm the group head of Retail Nepal. I think for me, it's not just about being just. I think for me, for Africa, we need to create our own pathway, localize our own story that fits our current environment. And in a room like this, when we are talking to young entrepreneurs, I think our focus for Nigeria or Africa will be trying to create a policy or a platform where small-scale businesses are able to access off-the-grid renewable energy that can help to support their business. And if these small-scale businesses are able to power their businesses with cheaper renewable energy, such as solar-powered, for small businesses, even as small as a barbering salon or a boutique or a tailor shop. That way, we can be able to build our own story, as to say we're trying to just go all green. And then when people are able to now grow their businesses, then government in its own way is trying to create cheaper financing for these people to be able to access this off-the-grid renewable energy to help grow their business and save money in terms of operating expenses that they can use to grow their business. And that way, we can be able to build and upscale, and then Africa can grow and have larger, bigger companies and businesses.
I like the angle we kicked in about wearing cost down for the manufacturing sector, right? Because that impacts profitability. And we can explore that a little bit later. So I'm going to come to Alex G. To your take on, how the cheaper is from.
Thank you for your question, and I think I can echo what the gentleman said, the Alexes before me. From my perspective, of course, ESG in its essence has a Eurocentric view of the world, right? But I see it as an opportunity for Africa to redefine the narrative of what does it mean to be just. And this is an enormous opportunity for Africa, not necessarily to leapfrog, but to simultaneously develop both the hydrocarbon resources from an energy perspective as well as renewable energy resources. So Europe has taken a very linear development path, and we have the opportunity now, with all of the knowledge that we have now, to develop our own narrative and serve our own needs. I think that is most important. How can we define the just transition so that we serve our own needs, affordability, access to energy? And then, of course, we need to guide against a paradigm that doesn't serve us. I mean, being too overly environmental doesn't serve us, to be quite honest. I've seen many projects that haven't been able to come to life because of environmental lawyers. They keep on blocking things. So we need to find a balanced view and try and serve our needs whilst we're serving climate and serving the environment and serving our social communities. So that is my view, a very, very balanced view, and trying to find the middle work.
So what I'm hearing you say is that we don't have a choice. We will have to go to energy transition, but it's a marathon, it's not a sprint.
100%. And I would encourage the many African countries that they need to keep on exploring. I mean, we need to develop our hydrocarbon resources and use it to our benefit. But whilst we are doing that, use the knowledge that we have today and do that as environmentally friendly as possible. There are so many new technologies that we can import, and we actually, Africa can be pioneers in championing those technologies, right? So,
Thanks, Alex. We'll come back to this. Alex E.
Oh, wow. Thank you very much for the question. My name is Alex, and I work in the downstream industry. And my perspective on this question, how just is the just transition? Really, I think the idea and the concept is like a noble concept in theory and on paper, but how that translates to different stakeholder would have to be contextual, right? So the whole thing that drives this conversation, particularly in the West, is usually around emissions and decarbonization. But that situation is very different from the situation that we are in right now. Some would say that we should be prioritizing development and the use of the natural resources that we have, in particular gas. But from my view, I think even before we get there, what will really drive our action is really an iterative optimization of the current systems that exist. So while it's nice to have this vision of, electric cars and solar grids, I think the place for us to start in this journey would really be for us to figure out how to use what we have more efficiently, to optimize it, to deliver the fuel that is available at lower cost. And then from there, iteratively, we can grow and get to a point where, we can really have this focus on emission reduction as a priority. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Optimizing resources. I'm going to go to Alex Osho, and I want to focus on operations, right? How do you sustain your operations while still planning towards transition? Because, it's business has to go on, right? So how would you, balance your computational activities with investment in renewables, knowing that it's a marathon, it's a long journey, and we might not necessarily meet the timelines that have been set out, but at the same time, we also have to be responsive to the changes in regulation or even the ability to attract funding because of the frameworks that are in place.
Okay, thanks, Uche, for that question. As an energy company, I think the solutions fall within a spectrum. At the most basic, there are maybe 2 or 3 things you need to at the most basic. One is to try as much as possible to reduce the carbon footprint of your current operations. That's, the most basic. The next one, again, along the basic solutions is some sort of social responsibility type projects that has minimal impacts on your resources, on your balance sheets, your income statement, or your cash flow, something to demonstrate that you are thinking, because ESG is E, S, and G actually, but we always think a lot about the E as if it was only about the E. There's the S and the G. Just cleaning up your governance is ESG. The social part of it is the S, right? So at the basic end of the spectrum, some sort of social responsibility type projects that seeks to enhance your community, that seeks to enhance the overall stakeholder environment and things like that. If you then go across the spectrum to sort of more impactful, more advanced type solutions, you then start to talk about your energy mix as a company, or even a full movement from fossil fuel into full green. You're not going to see that anytime soon, by the way. But companies are looking to make that transition along the way, in line with their features as a company. The smaller companies are thinking more basic. How do I create a plan? How do I do the CSR stuff? The bigger companies that are more complicated, that have a wider portfolio, are thinking more actually investing in businesses that in renewable space, right? But doing that requires a balance, and that is, how do I ensure that my operating businesses that are cash generative don't suffer capital allocation? Okay, that means that you do your BAU, your business as usual. You're not going to stop investing in fossil fuels. We're going to keep drilling. We're going to keep looking for new assets. That's not going to stop. But while we're doing all that, we're also allocating capital to exploring new areas in, cleaner fuels, greener energy, lower emission type solutions, right? And there's several of those. There are nature-based solutions. There's solar. There are all sort of things that you can do while keeping your BAU. And that strategy you find a lot with the largest companies, the IOC and all of that. So again, the solution really falls across a spectrum, and we apply the strategy based on where you are as a company, in your cycle as a company. Really, that's what we're trying to do as energy companies. Thank you.
All right, I'll come back to you later on some questions around financing all of this that you spoke about. I wanted to find out from you, energy infrastructure in projects in Africa face quite a lot of delays and cost overruns due to the complex tenure, obviously, and procurement models, coordination gaps, or even inability to access funding. So, from your experience, what are some of the practical solutions that can help us to improve the speed, reliability, and affordability of projects across Africa, bearing in mind that we're still operating within the ESG frameworks and just transition agenda?
So we see that many of the larger infrastructure projects that we conduct, that you have a very long period that you have to set aside in your project schedule for your EOB, right? And if one could expedite that, I think many more projects you'll be able to get over the line quicker. So maybe there are ways of, not necessarily skimping on quality, but maybe expediting that and making it more, more accelerated. That is one of the aspects. The other aspects are, in many, there are infrastructure projects and have trouble getting in equipment. It takes months to bring in equipment. They would lie at customs. It costs you literally so many dollars every day that the equipment is lying and you can't build. So some form of harmonization, maybe in terms of customs and bringing in big equipment, I think would be helpful. And yes, also something that has been discussed, visas, people just struggling. So we run a Pan-African business. We need to travel a lot. My passport is already full with so many stamps and visas. So I think we've really used this Euro vision, of how can we have an African continental vision, maybe one currency, maybe free movement of people. I think that will expedite, many of our larger industrial projects much more. So that now was very visionary. Spark started very practical. That's very visionary. But those are the types of aspects that we follow.
I think it's important for us to keep that at the back of our minds as listeners, that yes, these solutions may have been said before in different ways and form, but every day it becomes more practical. There's more information available, and then we can sort of keep pushing the envelope until we actually have the solution. So just thought to mention that. So now I'm going to come back to you. I'm going to come back to you, Alice Ekoma. And I want to ask you about CNG and solar adoption, and adoption, sorry. I mean, it's not reached its potential in many of the African markets, even though it's, obviously an opportunity we see right there. So what are some of the practical strategies that can ensure that these technologies can scale successfully despite operational markets and financial challenges that she just spoke about? And maybe you can, speak from an example from within your operations, across the continent, to just help to put some context around this conversation.
My view about this CNG and solar, right? Like, the real thing we're trying to do is to have a long-term view of bringing down costs to serve the consumers, right? So we've looked at different ways to fund our acquisitions of our solar and CNG infrastructure, right? And the whole idea is just really around what I said about iteration, to just figure out how to incorporate these things to just reduce the final cost of the products that we serve to our consumers to them, right? And at Nepal, what we try to do is understand it more. So we rolled out in phases CNG trucks. And, you know, it's very different from how using CNG to, you know, distribute. It's very different from how it works with gas oil, which is what has been used traditionally. There are bottlenecks that we found, but the first thing is just really getting that knowledge in and iteratively reviewing things, right? We also looked at it in Southern Africa region. Well, our approach there has really been to like have collaborative partnerships with people that are already existing in that space. It's landlocked, largely landlocked, so planning the routes is another set of skill that needs to be brought into the launch of that program. So I think the point that I just wanted to pass across is that these are new things that are being introduced, and we are just trying to iteratively get better in adopting it to deliver value to our customers.
So it's a good segue to land this question, because your question would be more around, he spoke about the logistic bottlenecks. So this is for Nandi. What do you reckon is the biggest barrier and the challenges in the transportation of some of these products in Africa? What do you think can help when you see this problem? Because if it's a solution, or we have logistic challenges in moving it around, then how do you get the products to the last mile user?
I think for us in the retailing business, our biggest barrier will be the availability of infrastructures. To access this CNG itself is a challenge. So, and a way for us to overcome that will be for the government to sort of create cheaper source of financing for people to come in and invest heavily in that space, and then build a whole lot of CNG model stations, CNG delta stations. Because, for instance, as a truck owner, I can say, yes, I want to buy a CNG truck, but the next question will be, where do I fuel this truck? And if I'm going to move goods up country, far north or far into the eastern part of Nigeria, how do I get to fuel my trucks? So it's unlike your normal diesel trucks, where you will see a lot of fuel stations all around, and then when you need fuel, you just go in, drive into a fuel station, then you can fuel your trucks. But for the CNG, you don't even have the opportunity to even wait for it to finish from the truck, because it will mean that you can't even move the truck anymore. So you will need to have these daughter stations all over the country, mother stations available. You need to have the gas pipeline all around Nigeria, which will sort of encourage investors to come in, because it's highly capital intensive. So financing, cheaper financing has to be the focus. Government needs to also lay the infrastructure, which is the pipeline, that would encourage investors in that sector to then build these CNG model stations and data stations that would help to grow availability of this gas. And then fleet owners can be rest assured that, yes, this fuel is available for us to purchase, and then they can invest in having CNG trucks.
So, quick question on what you just said. A young entrepreneur in this room who's listening to this conversation and wants to get into the energy space, the challenge you just described, what's the low-hanging fruit for a young entrepreneur? Is it the water station? What on the value chain can they explore and they can get into the industry?
I think the lowest hanging fruit would be the daughter station.
The daughter station?
Yes, the daughter
What is
station.
the daughter station, for those who don't know?
The daughter station is the fuel, just like your normal retail fuel station. the daughter stations, CNG daughter stations are the fuel stations where you can go and fuel in your trucks. I think those are the lowest hanging fruit because they are, I think, just for example, with Dangote alone, investing in over 4,000 CNG trucks. And we also hear it's over 10,000, right, for cement, for, moving white products around. That is already an opportunity. And those trucks are queuing up every day looking for where to fuel CNG. So if you own a Delta station, I mean, this is just a low-hanging fruit where people can just drive into your first one and then buy CNG. Even a lot of vehicles, even in Lagos, Abuja, Benin, have converted from fuel to CNG. There are a lot of private vehicles, commercial buses who are moving with CNG, and they are looking for where to fuel their buses and their vehicles. So if, as a young entrepreneur, if you can invest in that space, there is money in that space.
Okay, you're heading here, and when you do that investment, we'll be here to take our commissions, right? Okay, so I come back to you, Alex O, and I want to talk about financing the industry, barriers to funding, and how can we overcome it, right? How do we unlock patient capital? Because it's a long journey ahead. How do we unlock patient capital to grow this industry?
Okay, so the first part of the question was how do we finance this transition?
Yeah.
And I think you answered it, and that is unlocking patient capital. How do we unlock patient capital? So first of all, in answering the first part of the question, the biggest issue is financing, but that's also because there is almost a punitive cost of financing in Africa. For African countries, there's several layers of risk that make the final cost of funding much higher, maybe 3-4 times higher than Europe or America. We then have to ask ourselves, how do we bring that cost to a manageable level? We're not going to achieve, Europe or America level financing just yet, because the risk is there. It's not as if it's not there. It's just that sometimes is overemphasized and overpriced, so to speak. And I think the way to achieve that is developing homegrown financing solutions. Again, using what we have, and we have money, quite frankly, to drive investments in Africa, attract African investments for African energy or African infrastructure. That means the government, so various governments have a big role to play in that. And in terms of patient capital, for example, I mentioned earlier, tapping into the long-term savings base of the countries, whether it's pension or other forms of sort of long-term savings base that can be channeled into these opportunities. And by the way, they're designed for that, long-term funding for long-term opportunities. That's one thing. So there's a lot of policy work that needs to go into that. And there's a lot of work also going on in the, if you think about what Afreximbank and AFC and Apple and some of the DFIs, African-led DFIs are doing, being able to, or looking at how to mobilize long-term funding that is suited for Africa. Really, that's really the only way to do. It's really just to unlock the issues. And like I said earlier, a lot of the issues are really also importing that costs from out there into Africa. If we can look at homegrown solutions, we will be able to solve some of the problems. Thank you.
Okay, there's so much we can cover in these conversations. I would have to carry on, but before we wrap up, because we just have a few minutes, so this will be rapid response, and I just want, just from each and every one of you, what is the one bold continent-defiant step towards a just energy transition that will be rooted in our realities instead of expectations that are not necessarily realistic against our complex environment? So one bold step that Africa can take either at the micro level, company level, country level, continent level towards a just energy transition. And this is rapid response, so just a few seconds, sharp, short, and then we can wrap up the panel. So I'm going to start with Alex G.
Keep on drilling.
Keep on drilling. Drill, baby, drill.
Drill, baby, drill. That's the answer.
Okay.
Well,
Alex O?
for me, I would say we should
Okay.
For me, I would say we should develop our gas more. We need to develop, yeah, that's also drilling. So as we're drilling, stop the flaring and, develop the gas, yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Gas is our solution to energy transition. All right, and Nati, what would be your final point?
I think we should just increase our knowledge and information gathering.
Increase our knowledge and information gathering. That is very, very critical as well. Okay? All right, I think we've come to the end of this panel. There's so much that we can continue to talk about, but I think these are just supposed to be trigger conversations to keep the conversation alive. So feel free to meet any of the panelists if you see them around and have conversations to explore any of the topics that are very interesting, very important to you in more details. So we have into March of 7. Thank you to my panelists for your insights and we look forward to conversations in the future.